For 10 years, the kingdom of Veyrith Hollow believed the Alpha King was nothing more than a story told to frighten young pups into obedience. The elders said his name in low voices, as if speaking it too loudly might wake something better left asleep. Few remembered that he had once been real. Fewer still remembered why he had vanished. Deep beneath the Hollow Mountains, in a cell carved from cold stone and older magic, Kael Draven was still very much alive. He did not move much anymore. There was no reason to. His body was strong, but his wolf, the part of him that made him who he truly was, had been bound so tightly that even breathing felt like carrying a mountain on his back. Every day looked the same: darkness, silence, and the faint sound of dripping water somewhere far above him. He remembered everything. He remembered the night the Council of Elders had smiled at him while leading him into a trap disguised as a celebration. He remembered the moment the seal closed around his chest like invisible chains, and the way Marcus Thorn, a man he had once trusted, had watched without blinking as it happened. "This is for the good of the kingdom," Thorn had said. Kael had laughed at the time, because he thought it was a joke. He was not laughing anymore. Above ground, the kingdom had changed in ways that would have made the old Alpha King furious if he could have seen them. Thorn ruled now, not as a king, but as a shadow wearing a king's authority. Packs that once thrived under fair leadership now lived in quiet fear. Taxes rose, punishments grew harsher. Anyone who questioned the council disappeared from public life, sent away to serve the kingdom in places no one ever returned from. Liora Ashworth had grown up in this version of the world, so she did not know any different. She was a healer in the Crimson Moon Pack, gentle and quick with her hands, the kind of person neighbors trusted with their sick children and aching grandparents. She had no interest in politics or power. She wanted only to help people and live a quiet life. That quiet life ended the day her pack leader gave her an unusual assignment. "There's a prisoner in the mountains," he told her, refusing to meet her eyes. "Council orders. He needs care, but no questions." Liora did not like the sound of it, but in a kingdom like this, questions were dangerous. She packed her healing supplies and followed 2 silent guards into the Hollow Mountains, where the air grew colder with every step, and the walls seemed to whisper old secrets. When she finally reached the cell, she expected to see a criminal, perhaps a murderer, or a traitor. What she found instead was a man whose eyes held more sadness than cruelty. He was thin in ways that suggested years of poor care, but his presence still filled the small space entirely, as if the room had been built around him, rather than the other way around. "You're not the usual one," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm a healer," she answered, kneeling beside him. "I'm here to help." He studied her for a long moment. "No one helps me." "I'm not no one," she said simply, and began her work. She did not know his name. She did not know what he had done, or what had been done to him. She only knew that his body needed care, so she gave it without hesitation. As she cleaned a wound near his wrist, her fingers brushed against a strange mark on his skin, one that glowed faintly silver under her touch. The moment her blood mixed with his, something ancient stirred. The mark began to pulse with light. Kael gasped, gripping the stone floor as a sensation he had almost forgotten how to feel rushed through him. Warmth, power, presence. Liora stumbled back, startled, unaware that her own blood carried the legacy of the witch who had created that very seal generations ago. She had no idea who her ancestors were. She had simply been born with magic sleeping quietly in her veins, waiting for this exact moment to wake. "What did you do?" Kael asked, staring at his own hand as if seeing it for the first time in years. "I don't know," Liora whispered, equally shaken. Outside the cell, unseen by either of them, a faint crack split across the ancient binding stone, embedded in the wall. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was the beginning of something the kingdom was not prepared for. News of unusual activity in the mountains reached Sarah Voss within hours. Sarah had once been Kael's most loyal beta, fierce and fearless, the kind of fighter other wolves respected without needing to be told why. After Kael's imprisonment, she had been demoted, watched, and eventually pushed to the edges of pack life. But she had never given up hope. For 10 years, She had searched quietly for any sign that the seal might weaken, and now, finally, she had found it. She made her way into the mountains under the cover of night, slipping past guards with practiced ease. When she found Kael's cell, she saw the cracks spreading across the binding stone and felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in years. "It's happening," she said softly. "It's actually happening." Liora, still kneeling beside Kael, looked between them in confusion. "Who are you? What is going on?" "There's no time to explain everything," Sarah said, kneeling to inspect the weakening seal. "But you need to know one thing. The man in front of you is the rightful ruler of this kingdom. Everything you've been taught is a lie, built to keep him buried and keep Thorn in power." Kael watched Liora carefully, searching her face for fear or disbelief. Instead, he found something unexpected: quiet curiosity, the same gentle steadiness she had shown while treating his wounds. "I don't fully understand," Liora admitted, "but I believe you." Over the following hours, the seal continued to weaken under the combined effect of Liora's presence and Sarah's careful work with the ancient stone. By the time the first sunlight crept through the mountain's upper cracks, the binding shattered completely, releasing a wave of energy that rattled loose stones and extinguished torches throughout the tunnels. Kael rose to his feet for the first time in years, and the difference was immediate. His shoulders straightened, his eyes sharpened. The quiet sadness that had clouded his expression gave way to something steady and certain. He was, once again, fully himself. "Thorn," he said, his voice carrying a calm that was somehow more unsettling than anger. "It's time he learns what happens when chains finally break." Word spread quickly once they left the mountains. Whispers moved from pack to pack like wildfire, carried by those who had seen Kael walking freely for the first time in a decade. Some doubted it. Most feared it. None could ignore it. Marcus Thorn received the news in his private chambers, his expression unreadable as a trembling messenger explained what had happened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he simply asked, "How long until he reaches the capital?" "2 days, my lord. Perhaps less." Thorn dismissed the messenger and sat alone, staring at the crown he had worn in another man's place for 10 long years. He had told himself, over and over, that what he did was necessary. That Kael's power had grown too great, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted. He had built an entire kingdom on that belief. Now that belief was about to be tested. As Kael, Sarah, and Liora traveled toward the capital, they passed through packlands that had suffered under Thorn's rule. They saw families struggling under heavy taxes, elders too afraid to speak freely, and young wolves who had never known a fair leader. Each story they heard hardened Kael's resolve, not toward cruelty, but toward something steadier, a quiet determination to undo the damage that had been done in his name. Liora noticed this about him as the journey continued. He was not the monster the council had painted him as. He listened carefully when villagers spoke. He remembered names. When an elderly wolf offered him the last of her bread out of respect, he accepted it gently and thanked her by name an hour later. This was not the behavior of someone who needed to be feared. It was the behavior of someone who had simply been feared for being strong. "They were wrong about you," she said one evening as they rested near a quiet stream. "Maybe," Kael replied, "or maybe they were right to be cautious, just wrong about what to do with that caution." Liora considered this. What would you have done differently if you were in their position? "Talk to me," he said simply, "instead of locking me away." As they grew closer to the capital, more packs began to join their path, some out of curiosity, some out of hope, and some simply because Sarah's quiet network of old loyalists began spreading word that the true Alpha King had returned. By the time they reached the capital gates, a respectable number of wolves walked behind them, not as an army built for conflict, but as a gathering of people who wanted to see the truth for themselves. Thorn, watching from the capital walls, understood the danger immediately. This was not the kind of threat that could be solved with soldiers or punishment. This was the kind of threat that came from people remembering what fairness felt like. He met Kael at the capital gates personally, flanked by a handful of guards who looked far less confident than their stiff postures suggested. "You look well, for a man who spent 10 years underground," Thorn said evenly. "And you look comfortable, For a man wearing a crown that was never his, Kael replied. A tense silence settled between them, as onlookers gathered along the streets, watching closely. Liora stood near Sarah, her heart pounding, unsure what to expect. She had seen enough of Kael's character over the past 2 days to believe he wasn't interested in needless conflict. But Thorn's reputation suggested otherwise. "I did what I believed was necessary," Thorn said, his voice tightening. "Your power was too much for any one wolf to hold." "Then you should have helped me carry it," Kael answered, "instead of taking it from me entirely." The words landed heavier than any threat could have. Around them, murmurs spread through the gathered crowd, wolves who had lived under Thorn's strict rule, finally hearing someone speak the truth they had long suspected, but never dared say aloud. Sensing the shift in the crowd's mood, Thorn's guards exchanged uncertain glances. One by one, without a single command from Kael, they lowered their weapons. They had spent years enforcing a rule built on fear, but fear could not survive honest truth standing in front of it. Thorn looked around at his crumbling support and understood, perhaps for the first time, that his control had always depended on people believing they had no other choice. Now that Kael stood before them, calm and clearly capable, that illusion shattered completely. "This doesn't have to end badly for you," Kael said quietly, surprising everyone, including Thorn. "Step aside. Answer for what you've done through fair judgment, not through revenge. The kingdom deserves better than another cycle of fear, even if it's pointed at you instead of me." Thorn hesitated, searching Kael's face for any sign of deception. Finding none, his shoulders finally sank in quiet defeat. "You were never the danger I told myself you were," he admitted softly. "No," Kael agreed, "I never was." In the days that followed, the kingdom of Veyrith Hollow began the slow process of healing. Thorn faced a fair council hearing, stripped of his stolen authority, but spared from the harsher punishment many had expected. Pack leaders who had ruled through fear were replaced gradually with others chosen through honest agreement, rather than forced loyalty. Taxes eased, trust, slowly, began to return. Kael resumed his place as Alpha King, but he ruled differently than he had before his imprisonment. He listened more. He explained his decisions instead of simply expecting obedience. He visited Packlands personally instead of waiting for reports. The decade he had lost seemed to have taught him something valuable. Power meant little without the people willing to stand beside it. Liora remained close to the castle, though she never sought any official position. She continued her work as a healer, now welcomed by patients from every pack who had heard of her role in freeing the rightful king. She never thought of herself as someone important. To her, she had simply done what felt right at the time. One evening, as the sun set gently over the castle gardens, Kael found her tending to a small patch of healing herbs she had planted near the outer wall. "You could ask for anything," he said, watching her work. "A title, land, gold. You changed the future of this kingdom." "I didn't do it for any of that," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "I did it because it felt right." Kael considered this for a long moment. "That's exactly why I trust you," he said. "Everyone else who ever stood close to me wanted something. You never did." Liora smiled faintly, unsure how to respond to such honesty. "Stay," Kael added, quieter now. "Not because I need a healer, because I'd like to know you better, without any chains, mine or otherwise, standing between us." For the first time since her quiet, simple life had been upended by mountain tunnels and ancient seals, Liora felt something settle peacefully in her chest. She looked at the man beside her, no longer a prisoner, no longer a myth, but simply a person trying to build something better out of everything that had been taken from him. "I think I'd like that," she said. And as the sun disappeared behind the mountains that had once held him captive, Kael Draven, the Alpha King whose seal had finally broken, allowed himself something he hadn't felt in a very long time.